good afternoon. Thank you everyone for having us, and a huge thank you to SAMAC for inviting us to do this slightly different study. Let me just go to the next slide. So my name is Jayne Bullen. I head up the Noakes Foundation group, so that includes the Noakes Foundation that conducted the study, as well as the Nutrition Network, where we train healthcare workers around the world on the reversal of chronic disease through diet, and also Eat Better South Africa, which is our non-profit based in South Africa, where we go into underserved communities and we take particularly women on a program that reverses chronic disease through dietary change. And this study was conducted and headed up by Shannon Mace, who's not here today. So if you ask very difficult questions, I'll say I won't be able to answer them. I have to send them to her. So what we looked at with this study was the effect of macadamia nut oil supplementation on metabolic health markers of interest compared with 2 other oils and the health benefits associated with them. So can I have a show of hands of anyone that eats or is interested in a low carbohydrate or banting diet in this room? Are there any of you out there? Couple of hands. So I don't need to sell it to you, but of course you all know that if somebody takes on a ketogenic or banting diet, the only nuts they're really allowed to eat are macadamia. And that is because of the high fat and low carbohydrate content in those nuts compared to others. So particularly if it's a medical epileptic diet or a neurological disease, no other nuts except macadamia. So obviously that's one of the reasons why the Noakes Foundation conducted the study, is because we spend an immense amount of time looking at different fats and talking about different fats and wondering about and being curious about the effects of this high fat diet on human health. So we had an amazing team of researchers and sports science and metabolic experts that worked on the study with us, as well as 4 global doctors from our network that consulted with the patients and looked at their blood markers and worked on the study. And what we did was we wanted to find out, our hypothesis was that blood and metabolic markers improved when we added nuts and or nut lipids, nut fats, oils, into the diet. And we understand, and what we know anecdotally through the thousands, if not millions of people that have now adopted a low-carb diet for different conditions, is that we see changes to visceral fat in the body, we see weight loss, we see improved blood glucose control, inflammation levels tend to improve, and lipid levels tend to improve. So we wanted to understand, A, if that is the case with a nut supplement. So can we, with an oil or a nut, actually prescribe for certain dietary and health conditions? So the study was an 8-week intervention, and what we did was we took 60 healthy, non-obese adult males and females. We took people that were both on a high-carb diet and a high-fat diet, so a mix of people, about 50-50, and we looked at people from the ages of 20 to 69. And I'm not going to go into the results in too much detail yet, but so we also did quite a thorough literature review. A lot of you know the literature that's out there. There's obvious early evidence that macadamia nut oil in particular is really, really good for the treatment of certain inflammatory conditions. It's also useful for lipid-lowering cardioprotective areas, neurodegenerative conditions, and also certain types of cancer are emerging as being correlated. So, yeah, and obviously what I said earlier is that there's such a high oil content, which is why we're particularly interested in macadamia nuts. And before I present the results, I have to apologize to everyone in this room. So I didn't qualify for the study, but I told my team that if I did qualify, I would only do it if I could do olive oil. I was adamant. I was like, there's absolutely no ways I'm going to take 45 mils of macadamia or coconut oil every day for 8 weeks. I will die. It's just too much for me. I'll be nauseous. It won't work. And I have to eat my words. I have to apologize to you. I was completely wrong. In 20 years of research, I've never been as surprised and excited by a data set as I was by this when the first blood markers came in. And they were not for macadamia. They were for the other olive oils. And then I was concerned. And you'll see why. So we had 60 participants, 3 groups, 2 subgroups. The subgroup was LCHF and the SAD diet, seasonal, so standard American diet, which we believe to be quite sad. And then we compared macadamia oil, coconut oil, and olive oil. So these people had to be well, they couldn't have chronic disease. And when you look at the results, I want you to bear that in mind. So When we take a diabetic and we put them on this kind of intervention, which we do all the time in our programs, the results are dramatically exacerbated. So you'll see people go from relatively healthy to healthier, or they go from relatively healthy to quite a bit less healthy. And you can imagine scaling that out if we'd taken a sick sample, which we'd like to do, but for the purposes of the study and for ethics, we had to look at non-obese, quite healthy, fit people. And those people ate 45 mils of raw oil a day with their diets. So they either took it neat or they added it into raw things. We had a dietitian working with them and consulting with them through the duration. Some of them struggled, others found it lovely and easy. And then we took a very, very comprehensive set of blood markers and anthropometric markers, so all of the things like your typical body mass, all of the measurements, etc. And the study was slightly delayed because of COVID, what wasn't. So we were commissioned to do it in October 2020, and the results were in January this year. And there was about 71% female, and there's just the age. You can see a relative spread with a skew of people in their 40s. So the first marker that I want to look at today is blood glucose in the macadamia group. So blood glucose, if a diabetic is put onto medication, we typically hope to see a reduction in fasting glucose of about 1. We hope to bring it down a little bit in the first 3 months. This was a normal non-diabetic population, and their glucose came down quite noticeably, more so in the LCHF group. So we split them out in the data in terms of low-carb eaters versus normal diet eaters. So what this indicates very clearly is that macadamia lipid supplementation is a very, very strongly likely treatment for diabetes or pre-diabetes. What we saw in the other two oils was that the blood glucose actually increased in the most part, which was surprising to us. Not good for either of the olive or coconut oil. Great news for you guys. So HDL, which is our good cholesterol that we want to increase to within range, HDL levels increased only in the macadamia oil category. So you'll see here, these are, again, as I said, they don't look like a significant increase, but these are very healthy, stable, metabolic people that we're looking at. So you can imagine that kind of, if we took a diabetic population being like that, not like that. And it came down slightly in the standard diet, which we see all the time. And we know why, but I won't get into the details today. So they were variable in the other oils, so there was no sort of obvious correlation. They did increase in the standard diet, which is an indicator that what happened there was the standard diet guys were probably eating less carbohydrates and improved their cholesterol profile. Triglycerides, which is a really, really good and key metric in the prediction of heart disease over the long term. We want to see our triglycerides come down, ideally to under 1, if you're really a health fanatic like Prof. Noakes, under 0.5. So they came down in the macadamia group, which is really, really good to see. Very rare to see this level of quick shift with just one supplement like this without more of an intervention. And they decrease as well in the other oils. GGT, which is a marker of liver health. So GGT, if your GGT is elevated, it looks like you either have liver disease or you're heading towards non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, came down in a notable way in both groups when they took macadamia oil. Now that obviously proves in a pilot context that taking extra fats doesn't adversely affect your liver if it's the correct fats. So here, it increased in the other two oils, which indicates that they're not as great for your liver as macadamia is, which surprised me. Interesting there. Quite small levels of increase, though. So lipase is an indicator of pancreatic health, and lipase levels improved relatively significantly in both cases, both diets on the macadamia group. And that indicates that we could probably look at studies where we look at people with pancreatic disease and improve, we could improve pancreatic damage. We could look at preventative pancreatic care with macadamia oil supplementation. And inconclusive to negative in the other two oils. So there was no real okay, we need to look at this further in that group. Amylase levels also improved. That's another pancreatic marker. They came down again significantly in the macadamia group, which is really wonderful news. And they were not great on the most part in the other two oils. So it increased quite significantly to the point that I was marginally concerned about those other groups when I saw the blood markers. So the ESR levels, which is one of our key inflammatory markers. So this is a really important one when we're looking at the context of the world at the moment and how most people are inflamed, chronic inflammation being the key driver of most chronic diseases, all correlated and with it. We saw a huge improvement in the ESR levels of those following a low-carb diet and a slight increase in those following a standard diet in the macadamia group. So this indicates that we could look at the treatment of inflammation with macadamia lipid supplementation, particularly if people are following a low-carb or ketogenic diet. And they also improved the other oils. So this indicates that eating a higher fat diet in terms of your macronutrients could show that we're looking at a decreased inflammatory state in the body. All good things, very, very good things for the macadamia group. So what we found on the most part was that inflammatory markers were very positive, and we were excited about seeing those results. We didn't expect to see it in such a short time, and this was a particular study where we didn't intervene in any other ways. So people carried on their normal lives. They didn't change their diet in any way. We didn't tell them to change anything except to take this little bit of oil in the mornings. And normally we do quite dramatic interventions. So the kinds of programs we do, we take people onto an entirely new diet, cut out half the foods they're eating, get them onto exercise, supplements, motivation. And this is a very, very simple and easy intervention in terms of lifestyle change that leads to dramatically improved inflammatory and other outlook markers. So very, very positive. And of course, this suggests that macadamia nuts and or macadamia oils could be a supplement. They are a health product. We know this. Gillian spoke about this before. But the data really, really suggests that it's something to correlate with metabolic health, is the consumption of increased macadamia nuts and or oils. So this is an important study because it has implications in terms of obviously the way that you take your product to market. It ties very tightly in with what Gillian talked about yesterday, which is wonderful in terms of the health benefits of macadamia is becoming more and more important. They trump other oils. So since this study, I have stopped feeding my family olive oil and started using macadamia oil when and where I can get it instead. So I won't put olive oil onto a salad. I won't cook with it as much anymore. I use this oil, and I'm sold. And I'm quite a fussy, analytical person, as we all are at the Noakes Foundation. And what this implies, certainly within our community, so we have trained 6,000 doctors around the world, and there are many more coming, that treat patients with a ketogenic or a high-fat diet, that this will be an actual supplement that would be prescribed to patients with chronic disease, which we know is more than 70% of Americans, for example. So medicinal and medical implications of the actual product itself, which adds to premium valuation of it. So some of the participants shared the obvious things. They felt less full, and the apostat and satiety is one of the biggest problems in weight loss and in the treatments of obesity, of course, is hunger and how to treat it. So it showed that supplementation of macadamia oil in particular improved satiety. People weren't as hungry, so they ate less calories. Coconut oil was a bit difficult, as expected. A couple of higher dropouts in the coconut oil sector or group because of nausea and just not enjoying the eating experience of it, whereas that was quite the opposite. And people had other things where their sleep improved, their skin improved. They all felt like they would continue to supplement their diet further into their lives post-intervention. So none of them were like so sick of the oil, particularly macadamia, that they chucked it down the drain. They all wanted to carry on, which surprised us. And what we feel, obviously, as with all research, this was a pilot study, so it indicated that there's a need for further research, for further randomized control trials in this area. We'd like to look over 6 months. We'd like to look at actually nuts as opposed to just the lipids, so different implications there. And we'd like to look at a different population size as well. And we know what we expect to see there, which would be particularly relevant in terms of the reduction of hypertension and cholesterol treatment. Very, very interesting. So we believe that that macadamia oil, I'm still saying olive, is by far the healthiest oil on the block. And we didn't, obviously it's difficult to do a study for an industry because we weren't sure that the results would be favorable to you. So it's wonderful to share this news and to say we're absolutely sure at this point of the looking at the clinical data that this is the case. We're all eating macadamia oil now instead, but it's difficult to buy. So in the local market, difficult to get access to the oil. And yeah, we're not at the point where we can start saying to patients, get off olive oil. It's not there yet. So we're still putting people onto things like wholesome coconut oil, butter, animal fats. So we'd also like to look at the comparison of plant-based oils with animal fats as part of the future studies. And I'm not going to go into that slide. Just quickly about the Noakes Foundation. Obviously, the work that we do is to look at how to improve human health into the future, and founded by Prof. Noakes. We've got some big questions that we'd like to answer. And as I said, we are trained medical professionals all over the world in 82 countries. Over 6,000 doctors have done our trainings. So out there all over the world in your markets are medical professionals that want this data and want to understand how they can give patients better outlook on life with dietary changes rather than medication. Eat Better South Africa. Not sure if this is going to play. Probably not, no. I had a video, but I won't play it. Thank you so much for your time. Any questions?